Hi folks, so the last thing we're going to chat about today is creating functions. And the process of creating a function is actually pretty simple because anytime you have a chunk of code like this that you think you're going to want to use more than once, or if you find yourself writing basically the same code more than once, that's a signal that you want to write a function. So fortunately, because I have my whole chunk of code here doing things, all I really have to do is this. I just need to sort of like mark it off as a function. So I'm just going to come up here and say function sort candies. Okay. Now, first of all, I need my brackets to contain all of the code that is associated with sorting candies. And I am going to say end of sort candies function. Now, the question is, how do I get my candies into this function, right? In other words, I've got everything set up. I've got new lists that I'm going to put the candies into. I've got my for loop that's going through things here, right? By the way, this is complaining because of my indent, I think. Let's find out. What's the damage? Oops, looks like I lost it. Did I lose a parentheses here? No. I don't know what it's complaining about. I think it's just being annoying. Oh, it doesn't like this, maybe. Let's see. Anyhow, I've done this, but how do I get the candies, right? I now have my list of candies up here. How do I get it into this function? Well, that's what this round parentheses are for, right? The round parentheses are basically where we say, these are the ingredients that I want you to do this recipe with, right? This is the stuff you need to do this process. And the only thing that can get a little bit tricky is that I don't want to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give inside the function, I'm going to create a local name, okay? I'm going to create an alias, if you will, that refers to the actual list of candies that I passed. So I'm going to say, I'm going to call this candies arg, okay? But I don't want to call it candies because I already have something in the program called candies, right? We generally don't want to duplicate variable names anywhere in our program. Maybe I'll just call this candies to sort. There we go. It's a little bit more descriptive, right? Which is always helpful. So again, this is turned blue, which is how Aptana is indicating to us that this is an argument. Now, the way that I like to think of arguments to functions is basically it's just an additional, it's a different identifier for the same thing, right? So out here in the world, this is called candies. The same way that out in the world, you might be identified by, say, your passport number or your social security number or some other kind of ID that for a larger entity like perhaps the US government or the world, I guess, if it's a passport, don't really know what the scope of that is, right? That's how you are understood. When you move between countries, you use a passport and that passport number identifies you globally, right? So here, candies is what we actually do call it the global identifier for this particular list of stuff, right? So for the substance that is this list of stuff. Inside my function, it's sort of like, being inside Columbia University, and it uses a different way to refer to you, right? It uses your uni, but obviously it still refers to you substantively, right? So you can think of this as like it is actually literally sort of a local reference, right? So it's a local name for this same thing, okay? And so instead, in this case of saying candies here, I need to use, again, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I realize that might not make sense to people from outside the US, but it's an old marketing line for Las Vegas, right? Which is this idea that it doesn't exist outside of this thing, which is actually true. So instead of referencing candies, right, I want to reference the local name. Okay, so I've still got all this, and in fact, because of the way I've structured my code here, I only actually have to replace it in one place, right? I just where I create this item variable, I just have to say, look, I want you to use whatever this list is, right? Look at this thing, this name, and then get the item there. Now, one thing we'll find once we've done this is everything should be fine syntactically, right? I don't have any errors, but suddenly my actual sorting has stopped. And the reason why is because I've now described a set of instructions for doing sorting, right, for sorting a list of candies, but I haven't actually told the program to do it, right? So there's one thing which is defining the set of instructions, right? Like there's defining, like knowing how to make coffee, and then there's actually making the coffee. And in order to make the coffee or sort the candies, I have to actually say, look, I'm gonna go do that now. And what's the material that I'm going to do that on? I want to do it on this, right? So I'm saying, look, take that candies list I described up top, right? I described it above. You notice that the function is defined above because a function is just like a variable in the sense that I can't follow a set of instructions you haven't given me, right? You have to tell me what the instructions are first before I can do them. And then you have to tell me what stuff I need to do them with, right? And in this case, that stuff is going to be the list of candies. So if this has worked correctly, then I should now see the exact same thing that I did before. And indeed, here we have, right, our return, our printout of our sorting. So this is pretty good. Everything seems to be working. Let's test that this would work with a different list, right? So I'm now going to come up with a different list, and I'm going to say, oh, I don't know, 3 Musketeers, and this has nougat, which is something that nobody knows what it is. I'm going to say, ooh, what's a plain chocolate bar? I'm going to say Dove. And I do love a Kit Kat mostly, but for the purposes of this exercise, we'll pretend I don't. And I don't know, let's just throw Reese's Cups in there, because why not? Okay, so again, the only thing that I'm testing, right, the only thing that should appear in my fave candies list are things that are plain, right? So I now have a second list of candies. That is a very bad variable names, but we're gonna work with it for the moment, right? So the value in this is that I can sort candies, but I can also sort candies too. And you'll notice that in this case, only the Dove bar shows up, which is correct, and my non-faves is everything else, right? So I can do both of them, right? I can call this function twice. In fact, I can call this function as many times as I want, right? So I can execute this set of instructions, right? I can run this recipe as many times without having to write any more code. And that is the power of functions, is that it lets us take processes that are repetitive, right, that we need to do multiple times, lots of times, in fact, in many cases, and package them up into a set of instructions that we can kind of put that label on, right, just the way you have the title of a recipe, you know, baking a cake, make coffee, whatever, and we can just hand it the materials that it needs or that we want it to do that set of instructions on, and it will go ahead and do them as long as as long as we're performing those instructions on the same type of thing, okay? Now, the last thing that I just want to mention here is that for now we've been doing, you know, just console logging, which is great, you know, totally works. But very often when we actually manipulate things, right, like say separating them into two different lists, what we want is the result of that, right? We want to say, look, take this list of candies, you know, get rid of everything else and just give me back the ones that I like, right? And so in that case, we don't need a console log, right? Because console log prints it, but it doesn't give us a handle to it, right? It kind of just like these guys just disappear, fave candies and non-faves just like disappear at the end of this function. Let's see if that actually holds up. So the thing is that because we created fave candies and non-faves, inside this function, again, it's now packaged up and it's kind of like the rest of the program can't see it, right? It is really like hidden from view. It's like Vegas. And so what that means is that if I wanted to see the result of this, if I wanted to try to say, well, look, you know, what's in fave candies? Actually, I'm going to try this, right? So after sort candies, I know, and I've passed it a list of candies. I know that it's sorted something. I know that there's, you know, something in there. I see it in the console log, right? But if I try to check it here, right, after I've done the sort, first I have to spell it correctly. Guess what happens? It's like, oops, I don't know what you're talking about because it only exists in here. So what I actually want to do is, if I want to get my fave candies back, then I use what we call a return statement. And basically I say, look, return fave candies. And what that means is that if I want to hang on to fave candies, I would say, look, var my first faves, okay, is the result, right? So whatever gets returned by this function, I want you to put into this bucket, right? So you can see that we start, it's like an onion, it has many layers, right? We start to wrap up functionality in these kind of packages, right? So we're sort of wrapping up processes, and then we don't have to worry about them anymore. So I can say, look, whatever I want to create a bucket, label it my first faves, and I just want that to be whatever. Go off and do all this work, sort candies. Go do that set of instructions on this list of candies, and I don't care what you do. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. I just want the product, right? I just want those favorite candies. So now in this case, I would be console logging my first faves, right? Which should have, oops, I didn't follow my own instructions there. Okay, and same thing here. I'm going to say second faves. Right? And so now what I should get is those same two lists, but they now exist outside of the function. So make sure I've saved everything. I have saved everything. And now here I have my lists, and I've got just that stuff, and I can go ahead and do whatever I want with them. Okay, so again, there's a lot of material here, but actually this is it. You now know all of programming, pretty much. And we will obviously work through this in class. So the thing to keep in mind is basically that functions are recipes. We pass them ingredients, and as long as the ingredients list matches what that recipe needs, we can call that as many times as we want, and then later we can have a very complicated process performed for us without having to rewrite code, and we can just worry about getting the result that we want and sticking that in a box when we need it, rather than having to write it out over and over and over again. Okay, so that's all for the preview videos this week. I will see you all on Tuesday and again for lab on Wednesday.